In the quiet town of Brindlewood, Sheriff Elijah Matthews thought he had left violence behind after years in military service. But when his 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, is viciously attacked by a police officer in broad daylight, Elijah's world shatters. What begins as a fight for justice soon uncovers a deeper conspiracy, one that links the officer's actions to dark secrets from Elijah's own past. As Elijah battles to expose the corruption rotting Brindlewood's police force, he finds himself facing threats not just to his daughter's safety, but to the very foundations of his own life. With each discovery, the line between protector and avenger blurs. Torn between bringing the truth to light and protecting Sophia at all costs, Elijah must decide. How far is he willing to go for justice, and what will it cost him? Silent Shadows is a gripping tale of trauma, betrayal, and redemption, where a father's love becomes the key to unraveling a conspiracy that threatens to destroy everything he holds dear. The warmth of the summer sun bathed the town of Brindlewood in a golden light as families gathered in the park for the annual festival. The air was thick with the smell of funnel cakes and popcorn, and the distant sounds of carnival games and laughter created a sense of carefree joy. Elijah Matthews strolled slowly behind his daughter, Sophia, his eyes watchful but softened by the sight of her delight. Her curly hair bounced as she wheeled her bright blue chair toward the playground, where children were laughing and chasing one another around the swings. "Daddy, look! They have a new swing for wheelchairs," Sophia exclaimed, her voice full of excitement. Elijah smiled, though a familiar pang of worry tugged at him. "I see it, sweetheart. Just be careful, okay? I'll be right here." Sophia grinned, her small hands expertly maneuvering the chair over the gravel path. "I know, Dad. I'll be fine." Watching her race ahead, Elijah couldn't help but feel proud. Despite everything they'd been through, losing her mother, Sophia's condition, the challenges they faced, his daughter's spirit remained unbreakable. She was the reason he got out of bed every day, the light in his otherwise dark world. Elijah took a seat on a bench, allowing himself a rare moment of peace. He sipped his coffee and kept an eye on Sophia, who was making her way toward the swing set. For a moment, it felt like they had found some semblance of normalcy. But the peace didn't last. As Sophia neared the playground entrance, a tall figure stepped into her path. Elijah's brow furrowed when he recognized the uniform of a Brindlewood police officer, Jacob Stark. The officer's expression was hard, his jaw tight as he glared down at Sophia. Sophia paused, looking up at Officer Stark with innocent confusion. "Excuse me," she said politely, her small voice tinged with uncertainty. "I just want to go to the swings." But Stark didn't move. His eyes narrowed as if Sophia's presence was somehow an offense to him. "You need to leave," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the festival's happy hum. Sophia blinked, her confusion deepening. I just want to play. Can I go through? Didn't you hear me? I said get out of here." Stark's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of a few nearby parents. Sophia tried to roll backward, but the uneven gravel made it difficult. Panic flickered across her face as Stark stepped closer, his looming figure casting a shadow over her. "Please, I just want to—" Before she could finish, Stark's hand shot out, his palm connecting with her cheek in a sharp slap. The sound echoed, silencing the festival in an instant. Elijah's heart froze. He dropped his coffee and bolted from the bench, his pulse thundering in his ears. People gasped. Some pulled out their phones to record, but all Elijah saw was his daughter's stunned face, her hand flying to her cheek where a red mark was already forming. "Dad?" Sophia whimpered, her voice small, trembling. Elijah reached her in seconds, crouching beside her and pulling her into his arms. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." His voice shook with fury as he glared up at Stark. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Stark's face twisted with anger, but he didn't retreat. "She's in the way. She shouldn't be here." He spat, his eyes wild. Elijah stood, positioning himself between Sophia and Stark. His fists clenched, every muscle in his body tense with the urge to retaliate. But years of military discipline held him back. He wasn't just a father. He was the sheriff of this town, and he wouldn't let this brute push him into doing something reckless. "You just hit my daughter," Elijah growled. and you're going to pay for it." The crowd around them had grown, murmurs of disbelief rippling through the festival as more people realized what had just happened. Phones were out, recording every second, every heated word exchanged between Elijah and Stark. Stark, sensing the shifting tide of public opinion, straightened his posture and sneered. "I was enforcing the law. She was blocking the path. You should teach her to stay out of the way." Elijah felt his blood boil. His entire body trembled as he tried to keep his rage in check. "You think you can assault a child and get away with it because you wear that uniform?" "Stay out of this," Stark snapped, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. The crowd was no longer on his side, and he could feel it. At that moment, backup arrived. 2 officers approached, recognizing Stark's predicament. They moved quickly, trying to de-escalate the situation, but it was clear that things had already spiraled out of control. A murmur of outrage rose from the crowd as one of the officers, a nervous young man, tried to explain. "Let's calm down, everyone. We'll take Officer Stark in for questioning." "Questioning?" Elijah spat. "You're going to need more than questions after what he did." Parents in the crowd pulled their children close, their eyes flicking from Stark to Elijah, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Some of them were whispering, others shouting demands for accountability. As Stark was reluctantly led away, his eyes flicked back to Elijah and Sophia. There was no remorse in his expression, only a simmering hatred, like a storm that had not yet fully unleashed itself. Sophia's small hand gripped Elijah's arm as tears streaked down her face. "Dad, why did he do that?" Elijah knelt beside her, his heart breaking as he wiped away her tears. "I don't know, baby, but I promise you, I'm not going to let him get away with it." The crowd, still buzzing with disbelief, began chanting, their voices rising in unison. "Justice for Sophia! Justice for Sophia!" Elijah looked around at the sea of faces, some angry, some scared, but all united in their demand for answers. He could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of what had just happened, but he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, painful, and full of challenges he had never anticipated. But for Sophia, for his daughter, he would walk that road to the end. As he held her close, surrounded by the voices of the crowd, Elijah made a silent vow. Stark would pay, and the system that allowed men like him to thrive would be torn apart piece by piece. In the distance, the sound of sirens grew louder. Reinforcements were coming, but Elijah's mind was already moving to the next step. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was only the beginning. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Elijah's modest home, but the warm sunlight did little to ease the heavy weight pressing down on his chest. Sitting at the kitchen table, Elijah stared at his coffee cup, untouched, the swirling black liquid a mirror of his darkened thoughts. Sophia had barely spoken since the incident at the festival. She sat quietly on the couch, her cheek still bruised from Stark's unprovoked attack. Her wheelchair was parked next to her, but for the first time, she didn't seem eager to move or explore. The vibrancy in her eyes had dimmed. Elijah walked over to her, kneeling by the couch. "How are you feeling, baby?" Sophia looked up at him, her eyes red from tears that hadn't fully dried. "Why did he hit me, Dad? I didn't do anything wrong." Hearing the tremble in her voice cut through Elijah like a knife. He reached out and gently touched her hand. "I know, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. What he did, it wasn't your fault. And I promise you, he's not going to get away with it." Sophia blinked back tears, nodding. "You promise?" "I promise," Elijah said, his voice firm. He knew he had to hold on to that promise, not just for Sophia's sake, but for his own. He couldn't live with himself if he didn't fight for her. He stood and grabbed his phone, pacing across the room as he dialed the number of Tom Garcia, his old friend and a civil rights lawyer. The phone rang twice before Tom picked up. "Elijah? It's been a while." Tom's voice was warm but laced with concern. "I saw the news. I'm sorry, man. How's Sophia?" "She's shaken up," Elijah admitted, glancing over at her. "But she's strong. We need to take legal action, Tom. I want Stark held accountable." There was a pause on the other end before Tom spoke again. "I figured you'd say that. I'll come over later, and we can start building a case. But listen, Elijah, it's going to be a long fight. You know how these things go. I know, Elijah said, his voice hard. But we're not backing down. I won't let this slide. After hanging up, Elijah sat back down beside Sophia. Uncle Tom is coming over soon. He's going to help us make sure Officer Stark pays for what he did. Sophia's small fingers squeezed his hand. I just want to feel safe again, Dad. Elijah's jaw tightened. I'll make sure you do, baby. I'll make sure you do. Later that afternoon, Tom arrived at Elijah's house, a thick folder in his hands. He placed it on the kitchen table and pulled up a chair, spreading out documents in front of them. I did some digging on Stark, Tom began, his expression grim. He's got a history of complaints, excessive force, harassment, but they've all been swept under the rug. It looks like someone high up has been protecting him for years. Elijah frowned, scanning the papers. How is that possible? How did he get away with this? Tom sighed, shaking his head. That's what we need to find out. The Brindlewood Police Department isn't as clean as it seems. There's a lot more going on than just Stark's abuse of power. He's part of a system that's been shielding bad cops. Elijah felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. It wasn't just about Stark anymore. This was bigger than one officer. It was about an entire department that allowed corruption to fester. His mind raced as he pieced together the implications of Tom's findings. So, we're not just going after Stark, Elijah said, his voice low. We're going after the whole system. Tom nodded, his eyes serious. That's right. But it also means we're going to be up against a lot more resistance. People don't like having their secrets exposed, especially when those secrets are tied to power. Elijah clenched his fists. I don't care how deep this goes. We're going to expose them all. As they continued planning their next steps, Elijah's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, and his blood ran cold. Stop digging, or you'll regret it. We're watching. Elijah stared at the message, his heart pounding. He handed the phone to Tom, who raised an eyebrow. This isn't good, Tom said. They know you're coming after them. I'm not backing down, Elijah said through gritted teeth. Let them come. They won't scare me. But the weight of the threat hung heavy in the room. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing, and now Elijah had to consider not just his fight for justice, but also the safety of his family. The following day, Elijah stood in front of a small crowd gathered outside the courthouse. Local activists had organized a press conference in support of Sophia, and Elijah had been asked to speak. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him, but he knew it was necessary. He stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding as he looked out at the faces of those who had come to listen. Some held signs that read "Justice for Sophia" and "End Police Brutality." Reporters stood with their cameras trained on him, waiting for his words. Elijah cleared his throat, gripping the edges of the podium. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. I'm not here just as the sheriff of Brindlewood. I'm here as a father. A father whose daughter was attacked by someone who was supposed to protect her. The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. What happened to Sophia should never happen to any child, Elijah continued, his voice gaining strength. But it did, and now we're going to make sure the man responsible pays for it. Officer Jacob Stark is not an isolated case. He's part of a system that's allowed people like him to abuse their power without consequence. Elijah glanced down at the reporters, knowing that his next words would draw even more attention. We're not just seeking justice for Sophia. We're exposing the corruption that has poisoned our police department for too long. We're calling for accountability at every level. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The energy was building, a sense of unity and shared purpose filling the space. As Elijah finished his speech, he felt a wave of relief. But that relief was short-lived. As he stepped away from the microphone, his phone buzzed again. Another text message appeared on the screen. You should have stayed quiet. Now you've made it worse for yourself. Elijah's blood ran cold. The threat was no longer just a warning, it was a promise. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop, and now they were coming for him. Tom approached, his expression grim as he read the message over Elijah's shoulder. They're not playing around. I know, Elijah said, his jaw tightening. But neither am I. The fight for justice had just escalated. Elijah knew that his decision to speak out had put a target on his back, but he wasn't going to back down. He couldn't, not when so much was at stake. As he walked away from the courthouse, he glanced at Sophia, who had been watching from the sidelines with a determined look on her face. She nodded at him, her quiet resilience shining through. They were in this together now, and there was no turning back. The road ahead was dangerous, but Elijah was ready to face whatever came next, for Sophia and for the truth. The tension in Elijah's home was palpable. Since receiving the second threatening message, he had doubled his security measures. Every window was locked, every door bolted, and his eyes constantly flickered to the cameras he had installed around the property. He couldn't take any chances. Sophia, though still shaken by the events at the festival, had started to pick up on her father's unease. She sat in the living room, watching cartoons, but her gaze kept drifting toward the front door. "Dad," Sophia called, her voice tentative. Elijah was in the kitchen, cleaning his gun, a habit he'd picked up when the nerves became too much to bear. He looked up from the counter, trying to sound calm. "Yeah, sweetheart, are we safe?" Her words hung in the air like a question too heavy for her age. Elijah put down the gun and walked over to her, kneeling beside her wheelchair. He gently took her hand, offering what comfort he could. "We're safe. I've made sure of it." Sophia's eyes, still wide with uncertainty, searched his face. "But they're still out there, right? The people who hurt me, they are," Elijah admitted, his voice dropping. "But I'm going to make sure they don't hurt you again. I promise." Sophia nodded, but Elijah could see the fear lingering behind her brave expression. It killed him to see his daughter like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, unsure of when the next threat would come. The festival had robbed her of the innocence and security she once carried so effortlessly, and it was all because of Jacob Stark. As Sophia turned her attention back to the TV, Elijah's phone buzzed. It was Tom Garcia, his lawyer and friend. "Elijah, we need to talk." Tom's voice was low, and the concern was evident. "I've uncovered something that you're not going to like." Elijah's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "Meet me at my office. We can't talk about this over the phone." Elijah's pulse quickened. If Tom was worried enough to avoid discussing things over the phone, it meant whatever he had found was big, possibly dangerous. He glanced at Sophia, who was focused on her cartoon, then back at the door. The fight for justice was intensifying, and with it, the danger closing in on them both. "I'll be there in 30, Elijah said before hanging up. He walked over to Sophia and knelt down again. "I need to step out for a bit, but I won't be long. Aunt Lisa is going to come by and stay with you until I get back." Sophia frowned. "Where are you going?" "Just a meeting with Uncle Tom," Elijah reassured her, trying to sound casual. "Don't worry. I'll be back soon." Sophia didn't push further, but the look in her eyes told him that she understood more than she let on. Elijah kissed her forehead before stepping outside, the cold wind brushing against his skin. His instincts told him that this was just the beginning. Whatever Tom had uncovered would change everything. Tom's office was dimly lit when Elijah arrived. The blinds were drawn, and the room had the kind of tension that Elijah had only ever felt in interrogation rooms. Tom sat behind his desk, papers scattered in front of him. "Elijah, you might want to sit down for this," Tom said, gesturing toward the chair opposite him. Elijah didn't sit. "Just tell me what you found." Tom sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I've been digging through Officer Stark's file, and I came across something buried deep in his military record. Stark wasn't just any cop before he came to Brindlewood. He was involved in a military operation, one that went very, very wrong." Elijah's jaw clenched. "What kind of operation?" Tom hesitated. "It was during your last deployment. A covert mission in which a group of officers, including Stark, were sent to clean up an area suspected of insurgent activity. The problem is, Stark and his team ended up killing innocent civilians. Women, children." Elijah's stomach dropped. The memories of that final deployment came flooding back, days filled with moral ambiguity and the weight of decisions that could never be undone. But he had never been fully aware of Stark's involvement. How did he get away with it? Elijah demanded, pacing the room now. "That's where it gets interesting. The higher-ups covered it up. They pinned the blame on a few rogue soldiers, and Stark's record was scrubbed clean. But the truth is, Stark's actions that day were deliberate. And ever since then, he's been protected. Elijah's mind raced. This wasn't just about a corrupt cop abusing his power in a small town. This went deeper, back to his military days, back to the trauma he thought he had left behind. So Stark didn't just randomly attack Sophia. He knew who I was. Tom nodded grimly. That's what it looks like. This was personal. Elijah's hands balled into fists. The rage he had been keeping at bay surged forward, threatening to consume him. Stark's attack on Sophia wasn't a coincidence. It was an act of vengeance. And now Elijah understood why. Stark had spent years harboring bitterness for being abandoned by the system, and Elijah was a part of the reason. I'm going to make sure he pays for this, Elijah growled. Tom shook his head. Be careful, Elijah. You're dealing with more than just one rogue cop. Stark has allies, people who don't want this to come out. They'll stop at nothing to keep you from digging any deeper. Elijah's eyes darkened. I'm not afraid of them, Tom sighed, leaning back in his chair. I know you're not. But they'll come after the people you care about to get to you. You need to be ready. Elijah nodded, the weight of Tom's words pressing down on him. His fight for justice had become a fight for survival, for himself and for Sophia. The drive home was tense, and Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He parked the car in the driveway, stepping out and glancing around. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet. When he opened the front door, the house felt different, like a storm had passed through. There was no sound of the television, no sign of Sophia. Lisa? Elijah called, his voice thick with worry. Sophia? The silence that followed was deafening. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved quickly through the house, checking room after room. His worst fears solidified when he reached Sophia's bedroom. Her wheelchair lay on its side, and the window was wide open. His daughter was gone. No, Elijah whispered, dread choking his voice. No, no, no. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed Lisa's number. It went straight to voicemail. Panic surged through him, but before he could think, his phone buzzed with a text message. We warned you. Stop, or you'll lose her forever. Elijah's legs nearly gave out from beneath him. They had her. They had Sophia, the one person he had fought so hard to protect, the light of his life, gone. The room spun as Elijah tried to gather his thoughts. He had no idea where they had taken her or how long they'd had her, but one thing was clear. They were willing to use Sophia as leverage to make him stop. But Elijah wasn't going to stop. He couldn't. Not now. His vision blurred with rage as he dialed Tom's number. They have her, he said the moment Tom picked up. They took Sophia. Tom cursed under his breath. I'll contact everyone I know. We'll find her, Elijah. We'll get her back. But Elijah didn't wait for more instructions. His mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan. He wasn't going to sit back and wait for answers. He was going to hunt down Stark and anyone else involved. He would tear through the corruption that had taken his daughter and burn it all to the ground. With a cold resolve hardening in his chest, Elijah grabbed his gun and his badge. He was going to bring Sophia home, no matter the cost. As he stepped out into the night, the darkness closed in around him. But Elijah wasn't afraid. He was a man on a mission, and nothing, not even the forces threatening to destroy him, would stop him from finding his daughter. The game had changed, and now it was personal. Elijah's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel. The old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty. His breath came in short, sharp bursts as he pulled the car to a stop and stepped out into the night. The silence around him was deafening. He checked his phone one last time, the message from Stark still burning in his mind. Come alone, or you'll never see her again. This was it. Stark had played his final card, and now Elijah had to face him, to bring his daughter back, no matter the cost. As he approached the warehouse door, his mind raced. Every step felt heavier than the last, burdened with the weight of all the lives that had been ruined. Sophia's, his own, and even the innocent people Stark had hurt in the past. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing the vast, empty space inside. Dim light filtered in through cracks in the ceiling, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Elijah's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of Sophia. "Dad." Sophia's voice echoed from the far side of the room, weak but unmistakable. "Sophia." Elijah's heart leapt into his throat. He sprinted toward the sound, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. And then he saw her, Sophia, tied to a chair, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Elijah," came a voice from behind him, cold and filled with venom. Elijah froze, turning slowly to face Stark. The officer stood there, gun in hand, a twisted grin spreading across his face. "You should have stayed out of this. You had your chance to walk away." Elijah's jaw clenched. "Let her go, Stark. This is between you and me." Stark's eyes narrowed, his grip on the gun tightening. "You think you can just walk in here and fix everything? You ruined my life. Years ago. You left me to take the fall for things you did too." Elijah's breath caught. He hadn't realized Stark's resentment ran this deep, but there was no time to dwell on it now. He had to get Sophia out of here. "I didn't leave you behind, Stark," Elijah said, his voice low and steady. "But I will stop you now." Stark laughed bitterly. "Stop me? I don't think so." He raised the gun, aiming it at Elijah's chest. For a split second, Elijah's world slowed to a halt. Every muscle in his body tensed, his training kicking in. He lunged forward just as Stark squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse, but Elijah had already moved. He slammed into Stark, knocking the gun out of his hand and sending both of them crashing to the floor. They grappled in the dirt, fists flying. Elijah's years of combat training gave him the upper hand, but Stark fought with the ferocity of a man with nothing left to lose. Blow after blow landed until finally, Elijah pinned Stark to the ground, panting hard. "Where's your backup now, Stark?" Elijah growled. Stark spat blood, laughing through his pain. "They'll come for you too, Elijah. You think you can win this? You think exposing me will make a difference?" Elijah's fist hovered in the air, trembling with rage. For a brief moment, he was tempted to end it right here, to silence Stark forever. But then he heard Sophia's voice again, soft but strong. "Dad, don't." Elijah's hand lowered, his breath steadying. He wouldn't let Stark win, not like this. Not by turning into the very thing he despised. "You're going to prison, Stark," Elijah said, standing up and pulling Stark to his feet. "And I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you've done." Stark glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But the fight had gone out of him. Elijah bound his hands and pulled out his phone, calling for backup. It was over. Hours later, Elijah stood outside the warehouse, watching as Stark was loaded into the back of a police car. The sound of sirens filled the air, and the flashing lights illuminated the faces of the officers who had arrived to help. Among them was Chief Nora Hastings. "Elijah," Hastings said, stepping up beside him. Her face was grim, her tone hard. "We'll make sure Stark is prosecuted to the full extent of the law." Elijah turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "It's not just Stark, Chief. It's your whole department. The cover-ups, the corruption. It all leads back here. You've known about this for years." Hastings' eyes flickered with something. Regret, perhaps? She opened her mouth to speak, but Elijah cut her off. "I'm going to make sure this whole town knows what you've been hiding," he said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "It's over, Chief." Hastings stared at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I'll cooperate with the investigation. I don't have a choice anymore, do I?" Elijah shook his head. "No, you don't." As Hastings walked away, Elijah felt a strange sense of closure wash over him. The corruption that had plagued Brindlewood was finally being exposed, and justice, real justice, was on its way. A few weeks had passed since the night of the warehouse, and the town of Brindlewood was still reeling from the scandal that had rocked its police department. Officers were being investigated, and the press was swarming the courthouse every day, reporting on the fallout of the cover-up. Elijah and Sophia sat on the porch of their home, the sun setting behind the trees in the distance. It was a peaceful evening, the first one they'd had in what felt like forever. Sophia, still healing from her ordeal, leaned against her father, her hand resting on his. "Dad, do you think things will really change?" Elijah looked down at her, the soft light of the setting sun illuminating her face. "I think it's already changing, sweetheart. But change takes time." Sophia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad you didn't hurt him, Dad. You could have, but you didn't." Elijah's chest tightened. His daughter, wiser than her years, had seen through everything. "I did what I had to do. I wanted to protect you, not become like him." She smiled faintly, and for the first time in a long time, Elijah felt like they were going to be okay. The fight had been hard, the road long, but they had made it through. They had each other, and that was enough. "Come on," Elijah said, standing and taking her hand. "Let's go back to the park." Sophia's face lit up. "The park?" "Yeah," Elijah nodded. "The same one where it all began. But this time, we're going there without fear." Together, they walked down the familiar path, past the trees and the quiet streets of Brindlewood. As they reached the park, Elijah saw the playground ahead, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Children were laughing, playing, and for the first time in months, Elijah felt a sense of peace. They stopped near the swings, and Sophia looked up at her father. "We made it, didn't we?" Elijah smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Yeah, kid, we made it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass, Elijah and Sophia stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, together. The fight for justice had been won, and now it was time for them to heal. The future was uncertain, but they had each other, and that was all that mattered.